class. In this video, I'll be going over your topic 2 assignment, assessment practices. In this video, you're going to be looking at the ways we can assess students before, during, and after a lesson or a series of lessons. You're going to be using the assessment table template found over here in the topic 2 assignment directions. Part 1 is going to be completing that assessment table. So you're going to use the math and ELA standards and objectives that you created in topic 1, and you're going to bring those over to your topic 2 assignment. And then you'll complete this assessment table. It's important to note that I am very big on students refining their work in this course. So if I asked you to refine your work, you need to refine that objective and rewrite that refinement here on your topic 2 assignment. This is how students learn, is through feedback. And if I don't see you applying that feedback, I don't see that you are learning from this course. So it's really important that you refine your work, read your feedback I put on your assignments, if I did ask you to do some refinements here. All right. So when I first went over the topic 1 assignment, I had chosen this standard 3 NDC 5, and it has 2 subparts, A and B. So I included those both here, but do note that these are part of this standard. They just get a little more specific for us. Now, this one was all about recognizing area as an attribute of plane figures and understand the concepts of area measurement. And these are the 2 concepts of area measurement that they're really saying that the students need to understand. So first, a square unit with a side length of 1 unit is called 1 unit square. And it's said to have 1 square unit of area and can be used to measure area. So now we're looking away from linear measurement and we're going into square units. And that's really the understanding we want students to have when it comes to learning about area. In addition, a plane figure can be covered without gaps or overlaps by using n unit squares. So however unit squares it takes, or square units it takes, it should be able to cover it completely, and there should be no gaps or overlaps with those squares. And that's really important when students are exploring with hands-on materials, as they should when they are introduced to area. So here's my learning objective. Students will be able to measure the area of rectangles using square tiles and representing the total area in square units. So I chose to refine and get down from plane figures into a very specific plane figure, which is a rectangle. And that is okay. The standard is written at a higher level. And on this one day of learning, I'm going into plane figures. In 3rd grade, they tend to stay in rectangles or a series of rectangles that are connected because they don't go into odd shapes where the square tiles are cut in halves quite yet. So you want to make sure that you kind of stay within those parameters of what this grade is. And so I chose rectangles because that's going to be my my starting point with students. And then I'll move to rectilinear figures, which means rectangles or squares connected to rectangles or squares. So it can all be measured and partitioned into rectangles. All right, so now let's get into from topic 1, now we need to give an example of a formative assessment that aligns to my content standard. So formative assessments are those during instruction assessments. Are they getting it? Do I need to teach it again? Do I need to show them a different way? These inform your instruction, and that's why we call it formative, because it informs you on what your next steps are as a teacher so that students actually learn the concept. So in my example, students are going to use inch tile squares to determine the area of a given rectangle. So you might get a little more specific here, so I, as the person grading your assignment, can understand. So maybe I will give students a rectangle printed out, and they will use the inch tiles, manipulatives to tile the square and determine the area. Good spelling here. Okay. I will have students raise their hands when they finish, and I will look for the tiling to have no gaps and overlaps, and the area written in square units. So those are my two criteria I'm looking for, and that will help me and you both see exactly how I'm going to formatively assess students. So when I'm walking around and they raise their hands, I'll go, okay, did they tile that correctly? There's no gaps or overlaps, which is the first part or the second part of the standard. And did they name the in inches, because those are inch tile units, so they need to say they are 15 square inches. And so I'm going to look for both of those things. And that's when I can give students corrective feedback and help them understand how they can fix any misconceptions they may have. Or it's a great time for me to write students' names down who might need a second dose or a small group of this, or see who's ready to move on and continue working. The more detailed you are like this, the better it will be for me, so I can really understand what you're trying to say. All right, so then you're going to develop pre-assessment questions that assess students' prior knowledge. So think about this before I start teaching this standard and this objective. How am I going to see what students already know? So I'm going to start with giving them a quick little scenario to help see what they know and see if they have what knowledge they have about area. So this summer, they will replace our classroom carpet. How could you figure out how much carpet I would need in our classroom? So that's a way for them to see if they know anything about area, if they know anything about square units. It's very unlikely because this is the first time they are learning about area. And knowing where students are in a learning progression can kind of help you develop these. Like if they've learned about area in second grade, they might have this knowledge, but in third grade, because it has its beginning of a concept, they might not. And then my other question is just simple. What is area measurement? And those two questions just help me see if they know anything about measuring in the form of area. Then you'll need to have a formative assessment questions that assess student progress. So this was my actual assessment, but I can ask questions to the students that will help me assess their progress throughout my lesson. It might be after they do this, at the end of this lesson, just to see what they learned, any time in that learning process. So the two questions I developed is, how is area measurement different than linear measurement? This is one of those big ideas that the standard wants them to understand, which is recognizing area as a concept, or understand the concepts of area measurement. So they really need to understand how it's different than linear measurement. So that would be a good way for me to assess that. And knowing that it's not linear, but in square units is what I'm looking for there. Next question is, what is important to remember when measuring area? And that might just assess like, oh, you can't have gaps or overlaps, or that we name it in square units. Those are two things that could come out from this question. And that's why I have it kind of open-ended, because I want to see what students can give me without me leading them to what I'm looking for. And finally, you need to give an example of a summative assessment for this content standard. So now that students are understanding this concept of measurement, how will I know at the end of my teaching cycle of this standard if students can master the content? And so I like to make summative assessments more project-based or task-based, more fun. No, we don't need to do multiple choice quizzes on everything. Learning should be fun, school should be fun, so make it fun. So in my example, students are going to develop a floor plan for their own treehouse on graph paper. I might, because this is summative, I would have gotten past rectangles and moved into rectilinear figures, and where there's multiple rectangles maybe connected together. So one of my criteria for the students might be that they need to not make any diagonal lines on their graph paper, but it needs to stay within like the blue lines or the lines of the graph paper so that it creates rectilinear figures so they can easily find the area. And then they will find the area and express the area of their floor plan in square feet. So I could add a little more detail in there about them sticking within the lines of the graph paper. So I can really have that constraint, because once they start cutting those squares in half, it gets a lot more complicated and third graders aren't there yet. So I would add that detail there. And now I have a summative assessment. And then what are the criteria I'm looking for? I'm looking for them to have the proper area, and then it also measured in square feet. So I might put those two criteria here for that extra detail. You'll do then the same thing with your English language arts standards and objective. And then you'll have part 2, the reflection. In the reflection, it's supposed to be 250 to 500 words, and explain your reasoning for choosing your formative assessments, the questions, and the summative assessment. First, you want to talk about the alignment of objectives and standards and how they align to your assessment, the purpose for all these forms of assessment and how they inform your instruction, and your findings for your future professional practice. This is always my favorite question. What does this mean for you? You want to make sure you use APA and 3 scholarly resources. So please don't state your standards as one of those scholarly sources. I know where the standards come from. That's not a concern for me. I want you to be stating, supporting these ideas with those scholarly sources, talking about the purpose of assessment, how they inform your instruction. That's where I want to see your citations. Remember, anything on that resource page should be having an in-text citation somewhere in the bulk of your work. Let's go and take a minute to look at that rubric, because that is how we are graded. All right. So you can see we have both the ELA and math standard, grade level, and learning objective. If you don't do any refinements, when I asked you to do refinements, you will see that I might grade you down in this area specifically because I didn't see those refinements come through if you were asked to do refinements. Then we have those research citations and for future implications. If you don't use those scholarly resources, this is where you'll see that come through. And then if you don't have the reflections on how it applies to your class as well. And then we have the rationale, your reason for choosing these, your formative assessment. The table is well developed and thought-provoking. It proficiently looks at their prior knowledge and guides their assessment. And then we have the mechanics and then the summative assessment. So if you just do something like multiple choice test, that's not going to be super, it's not going to be a compelling example as the rubric says. And yes, it is an effective way to assess students, but this is a time where you can be creative. You can get those creative juices flowing. A multiple choice test is not compelling. It's basic. It's a basic example of something that student that you would use during a summative assessment, but you can get really creative using technology, thinking of tasks, and making learning fun for students. If you have any questions over this assignment, please don't hesitate to reach out, and have a wonderful day.